Welcome back. In this segment, we are going to compare and contrast two systems, the old school and the new school. We'll look at the traditional classroom setting and how the 21st century student fits into that environment. Let's start with the definition. I found this in Urban Dictionary. And for those of you who do not know about this, it's a wonderful translator for digital immigrants so they can understand all the strange words digital natives throw around these days. So when I went to their site and I did a search for old school, I got this. It's anything that is from an earlier era and looked upon with high regard or respect. And it can be used to refer to music, clothing, language, or anything really. Now, I find this kind of interesting. Something that is old school is somehow cool, even though many young people would probably never use cool and school in the same sentence. And I actually think many of us can relate to this. I'll even use an old school example. For those of you in the U.S., how many of you remember this? Parts of this film are quite relevant, like this scene, for example.
In 1930, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the, anyone? The Great Depression, passed the, anyone? A tariff bill, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which, anyone raised or lowered? Raised tariffs in an effort to collect more revenue for the federal government. Did it work? Anyone? Anyone know the effects?
I recall feeling this way as a student. And I'll be the first to admit that I have watched my own students glaze over during my lectures. I was following an old set of rules. I was depositing information so that my students could passively receive it. My curriculum was time-based, textbook-driven, and my students basically worked in isolation, mainly memorizing lots and lots of facts. The classes that they took were neatly divided by subject, and opportunities to work on interdisciplinary projects were few. Outsiders rarely saw their work, and the instructor alone really determined how they measured up. And of course, the tools of measurement were typically tests and tasks like homework and term papers. So how does this compare with our new school, or what many are referring to as the 21st century learning environment? Well, they are quite different on many levels. Roles are redefined, and projects are a bit more interrelated. And technology certainly has a role to play in the 21st century classroom. Not only can it serve as a means of making learning more engaging and dynamic, but we're finding that a lot of these great and free Web 2.0 tools can help students create products and knowledge for themselves. In other words, it changes how we are connecting with information. For example, I can read off a list of traits that might describe an ideal environment for today's learners. Or I can repackage this simple bit of information in a way that stresses the importance of the message I want to convey. And it does not take long to do. I took a list of traits and typed them into this Animoto program and let the system edit it for me. It only took a few minutes, and it produced a catchy video that shares my list in a whole new way. Let's look at what it did, and then let's look at why we are seeing more of this kind of thing in the classroom.
Begin where it ends, and to begin, knock on that door so you can get in, and don't mind the time, forget all that's been. Get lost in a park, find a tree that will last, find a secret path that leads to our house, climb the stairs to the roof, lay flat on your back. No use feeling down, get rid of the frown, take a walk on the sunny side, take a walk on the sunny side. No, wash shop in a stream that'll take you away through forests and seas, wherever they may. Fill up the space with your own melody. And every once in a while, when you miss the breeze, just look at the stars, marking your.
We also know that digital learners are accustomed to taking in information with video and audio, which is why multimedia is finding a home in so many classrooms, and textbooks are becoming more a thing of the past. But that's not all. Performances, projects, active learning, service learning, all these things help kids connect with knowledge through multiple mediums. And let's not forget that students multitask. So learning platforms that engage them through many mediums helps them because key messages are reinforced. It also means kids can leap from one topic to the next. In response, more and more programs are interdisciplinary and integrated than we've seen in the past. And let's not forget how much information they pull in every day. So the role of the teacher is consequently redefined. The teacher is no longer the sole dispenser of data. They are managers of information that is coming in from everywhere. We also don't want to forget that students prefer to come to their own conclusions. Hence the major shift between passive learning to active learning that we're seeing today. More and more, we are seeing teachers in the back of the classroom, not the front, where he or she will evaluate student projects and presentations, not the other way around. And of course, we want to remember that kids crave relevant content. They want things that relate to real life. They want to feel that the exercises that they're working on will connect to the outside world in some sort of meaningful way. So while the grade still matters, so does the outcome. So what can you do with this information? Now, I have no doubt in my mind that you are an expert. You've developed your material, you researched your material, you know your subject. And that's great news, because it means we have a wonderful foundation to build on. But what we may need to do is simply reorganize our material or redeliver it in a way that will resonate well with a digital native. And we can start by tearing down the traditional lecture. One of the easiest ways to do this is to speak in sound bites. It wasn't until I became a diplomat that I understood how important this was. And I learned about it while participating in a media training exercise called the murder board. With a murder board, you sit in front of a camera for a mock interview. A reporter will approach you and verbally tear you to pieces in front of 30 or so of your colleagues. Afterwards, they'll replay the video in front of everyone so they can point out your many, many, many mistakes. And of course, they'll invite your peers to join in on the process. And I learned something invaluable from the process, which is this: the inverted pyramid. Prior to this day, I delivered information like an academic. I did all my research, I built my case, and then I offered up my point. In media, there's no time for that, and the same is true of the digital age in general. For the digital native growing up in this environment, you'll need to get to the point fast and repeat that point at least 3 times during the lesson. So if you can, try and section off material so that you'll be able to start with an outcome in mind. Tell them the most important thing they need to know right off the bat, and try and reinforce it with action, even if you were simply writing the point on the chalkboard. And then tell them why it matters, not just once, but regularly. You also want to give them something to do. The 21st century curriculum is project-based because skills and content are not taught as an end in themselves. 21st century students learn through research and application.
Online teachers will want to make sure they are incorporating action steps that reinforce the lesson at hand. In a traditional setting, we give them a chance to participate in other ways. I ended many lectures with group discussions on controversies that required students to get together, argue, and debate, and then share their ideas with the class. I liked that they couldn't Google the answers and had to use
something from the lesson to support their point of view. Online instructors can easily create similar online discussion spaces by directing students to a message board or blog. I also encourage online students to make friendly critiques. They learn from each other, but it also pressures them to try harder when they know others will review their work. Then I try to look for partners. While teaching history, I partnered with politicians. They love speaking to potential voters, especially on an election year, and many will do recorded messages that you can share online. In one case, I worked with Tampa Mayor Pam Iorio to film a 3-minute welcome message just for my students. She had a master's degree in history, and her endorsement of the subject showed real-world relevance and was far more interesting than me just telling them why it was important. If there is an expert in your field, reach out. It's a flattering offer, and with Skype's record feature, it doesn't even have to take much time. It's also a good idea to think about how you can give your students a real-world audience. As you will see in this course, I like to encourage educators to develop products that automatically go online. If they choose, these same products will go right into new lessons or even form the basis of an e-portfolio. Be sure to consider projects your students can benefit from. So, we want to remember how folks of any age consume information. As a public diplomacy officer, I train with marketing experts out of Silicon Valley. They explain that when people Google something, oftentimes they are essentially asking one simple question. And that question typically sounds like, how can this make my life better? Anytime you can answer this question for your students, you're getting past their filter and connecting with them. So be sure to look through your lessons. And you can start by reviewing the lesson from the last section and ask yourself a few more questions. 1. Have you explained why your material matters right up front? See if you can make your point right away and not bury it in the lesson. Then look for opportunities to repeat this message as you work your way through your presentation. 2. Can you find or create a visual to reinforce this point? And 3, identify 2 possible speakers that could connect with your students. Many organizations have a speakers program or a marketing and press section that you can reach out to. A quick internet search should yield plenty of options. And that's it for now. When you're finished, please move on to the next section on 21st century teachers.